Welcome to the Southern Report. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for giving me the privilege of your time, something I do not take for granted, but I am very, very grateful. Please click subscribe, follow, make some positive comments. It's been a busy day here at the Southern Report. It's a bit like a London bus. When you want one, 10 of them turn up, and you have the privilege to talk to some incredible people and people that you have actually met personally when I go across the pond. So I'm going to bring on my brother, Greg Reid. We're going to catch up with him, what he's doing, and find out what the mood is in America. Greg, good to see you, my friend. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Grateful.
Thank you. I love your backdrop. I love that. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well, my friend. It's been an embattled year. I had some physical challenges, some accidents, but at some point you just have to say what Paul said, that all things are, for the furtherance of the gospel. And, until God, takes me, I'm fighting the fight as best I can. And there's plenty of fight left.
Well, praise God for that and hallelujah, because we are in I think we're in the biggest fight of our lives. You and I would agree on that. It's whether the rest of the church actually agrees. Maybe that's a conversation, part of our conversation, Greg, tonight.
Yes.
Greg, we had a little event on the 5th of November, which was the presidential election, which I'm sort of downplaying in a very sort of British way. But you and I had a discussion before that. How do you view what's happening in America now post that election? And we're in this rather, I think, in one sense, potentially very dangerous time, especially as we look at what's happening in the Middle East, but before the inauguration of the 20th. So just how do you see things from your vantage point?
I think those of us who are really watching this are very, we're in a very precarious time. And I've urged a lot of my Christian friends here, don't take a victory lap right now. This is when we need to be most vigilant. The powers that be are not happy about losing all of their power. And it's the time that we have to be vigilant in praying for the president, that he gets to the office. And at best case scenario, Mark, is that I think God may have granted us 4 more years. And we're either going to turn things around, or that whole wave, that tsunami of darkness is going to come back, and it's going to smack the church so hard that we're not going to know what hit us. And we're certainly not prepared for that scenario.
Unpacking what you've just said, when you say the church is not prepared for the scenario of the the evil, the enemy coming back at us, and say all of us on this side of the pond inclusive, but specifically for the American church in your situation, could you break that down? Why do you think the church is not prepared?
Well, I'm not trying to be too cynical, but I've been around for a long time, and I think a lot of American church doesn't even know what to do with a broken hairdryer. First world problems. We're still there, and not prepared for really making disciples in the church to go through difficult times. 2 of the things that I saw in the last couple of months that you think you've seen it all. But when I saw the mega church that had a water slide baptism, that was a bit of a challenge. And then I saw a pastor that was doing a sermon on hell, and he had his worship team playing AC/DC's Highway to Hell as an introduction. And I thought, we've just flat lost our minds. I mean, where the gates of hell were opened up at the church now, coming for the church, and we did not understand that yet. A lot of Christians did. I think prayer went into more prayer in this election than I've ever seen in my lifetime, and thank God for it. But now we need, like I said, it's not time for a victory lap. We need to say, how do we prepare the church for this 4 years from now, if it turns the other direction, are we ready for persecution? Are we ready to survive a time when just operating the church is going to be a legal challenge? And we've already seen, and I know you all have seen probably more than us, what is capable of happening when things are in the wrong hands. And I'm just urging my brothers and sisters over here, it's really time to wake up. It's past time to wake up.
How are they reacting to that when you use that language to say, you know, you haven't used this word, but I know you're inferring it. There is no room for complacency now, and that we do have 4 years. I think what you've said is absolutely wise, which is there is no time for a victory lap right now. And of course, you and I are saying that President Trump is not our Messiah. There is only, Christ is.
Right.
We're not saying that. But how do people react to that? Are there a number of people that you're talking to which say, Greg, you're not overreacting. We are with you. We understand what you're saying.
There are a few that are tracking. There are more that are just like, well, here we go again. You just can't see anything positive in anything. And, you get used to that for a while, because I'm just trying the best I can to tell people what I think is coming, just in terms of prayer and what the Lord's showing me in the scriptures. So there's probably kind of an even mix of those that don't want to hear about it. They're too busy being happy about all this. And, that's great. I mean, I'm thrilled about some of the stuff potentially going away. But we can never forget that even the best of situations, even the best of governments, we need to have some concerns. There's people that I like that are going into the government. There's people that I'm kind of raising an eyebrow. A couple of people I'm glad they didn't get in. But I'm concerned about people with huge amounts of money that get that close to a president. I almost feel like, I hope it's not Rasputin and the Tsar of Nicholas. I mean, you're always concerned when you see those things. And so, as the scriptures say, we don't put our trust in men. But if God gives us the apparatus, like Mike Huckabee being ambassador for Israel, brilliant decision, because he's a good man, and we all know of him and know that his heart's in the right place. But, those decisions are very delicate, and anything can happen. I think the thing we're keeping our eyes on, I am personally right now, is we've got these drones that are just sweeping the East Coast, and nobody in the government will tell us what's going on. And it's not like they don't know, but why aren't they telling us? This is no little things. These are SUV size drones, but nobody's saying a word. And I think that's probably going to amount to something bigger than we know. We'll have to see.
I hear you, and with friends up there as well, having had a conversation, a number of people are asking that, and of course, with what's been happening on your southern border, I don't have to tell you that, you're fully aware, where as J.J. Carroll and Ryan Major has talked about in What is Treason in their documentary, in regard to the amount of people coming over the border, the deliberate open border policy, which we have as well. You are not sure who you have in your country, but you are also certain that there are some people in your country that you wish were not in your country. And then the tie-up with what you're saying about these SUV type size drones that are going on. And I am as concerned as you are. I am as concerned as that.
And I think there's something that I thought of just a few weeks ago, because I know enough about the technology that's available out there, that we can in fact find a fly that is sitting on a log, down in the state of Chihuahua, Mexico, and we can send a drone in and blow that thing to smithereens, but we don't know where 325,000 children have gone. We know very well where they went, but nobody's going to tell us.
And unfortunately for certain individuals, that goes all the way up to the top and lands on certain people's desk that have a high profile politically, but they will not answer those questions. And I mean, you have a very, very different political system. Your system really asks the people, we the people, to participate in your system, whether that's attending school boards, etc., etc. Your whole system, in some respects, is very different, because it is about we the people. Now, of course, you and I can have a fascinating conversation with dear Tom Horn's work, which he's left us in regard to your founding fathers, the makeup of your founding fathers, who were Masons and all the rest. We're not denying any of that, but you do have an incredible system that is under attack. So, Greg, why do people say to you, "Oh, here he goes again. Here he is being negative"? And I don't mean that negatively to you, because I feel the same challenge at times. Why do people say that to you?
I think it's my ministry has always kind of been a dual ministry. It's been teaching and preaching, which I love to do, which is nothing but the Word of God and all the wonderful things in that. But there's always been a watchman aspect for many years as to what is coming for the church, and some people just simply, we'd like to say in my little group, it's like, well, they don't want to have their happy bubble popped.
Right.
And so it's just easier not to hear about. Who wants to hear about 325,000 children missing? Who wants to hear about some of the terrible things that people in power are doing? It's just easier to talk about the local football game or something like that. And I get it. But since the day the Lord called me, about the time when Jeremiah was called, which was 16, and I'm certainly not a prophet, but I came to understand that his was going to be not a very popular ministry. And in fact, I think in his whole life, he only made one, maybe two converts, and one was a scribe, and the other one was a eunuch that pulled him out of a hole. And so at some point, yeah, there are times where God needs to raise up people, not just myself, but others that are going to sound the alarm, because we have to let the church know what's coming so there's a chance of preparation. And if that doesn't happen, then you end up in the situation like the Chinese pastor that talked to the great Corrie ten Boom after a church service and was just weeping because he said, I spent my whole ministry telling my church that nothing was going to happen, that God was going to come and rapture the church. And then when the communists took over, everybody lost their faith. And that was so chilling to me because, like I said, the area of preparation, we're not there, and we need to get people on board that are willing to, pastors and churches that are willing to say, okay, let's have some classes. I've got some dear friends here that they're missionaries to Cuba, and they're in their 80s, and they go there twice a year, carry Bibles. They could spend the rest of their life in jail. And when they come back, they've been seeking churches where they can help the church prepare. And this entire city that I'm in, not one church wanted to have them come in and teach. I'm like, it's going to be a problem down the road.
So these incredible people who are in their 80s that go to Cuba and are walking down the road with missionaries there, they're engaging with people in Cuba. We understand the history of Fidel Castro, etc., who was friends with Che Guevara, which is another interesting conversation as we see young people wearing T-shirts with Che Guevara, thinking this is trendy, or graphics on the wall of him. Right. And then where you are, without giving that away, churches are not interested in what they've got to say or the warning. Greg, what specifically would these incredible 80-year-old missionaries be wanting to say to the church in your area? What would they specifically want to say?
That they was going to take the experiences they've learned from the communist countries they've worked in and say, look, this could happen here, and if it does, we need to be prepared. What does it look like to be persecuted for your faith? What does it look like to not have a church to go to? Can the gospel survive under those circumstances? Can your faith survive under those circumstances? So that's a lot of challenging material that they have brought to the churches, and it's so absolutely needed.
So they've got no idea of the whole plan of the fact that as communists realize, so Russia realized that they can't take America head on, as a friend has said even to me again today, they couldn't take America head on. They then realized that America is an open society, which they then could infiltrate. So you and I would go back to the Summer of Love in 1968. Before that, we look at, going into Vietnam and all the rest. But if you take the Summer of Love from then, what has been the church reaction to that? Now, just quickly, you are a continent. You are vast as a continent. The UK fits into Texas 2.5 times, to just give you an example. But maybe that's part of it, because of the vastness and the isolation and the fact that you do have a heck of a lot of land per capita in regard to an individual. But are people not paying attention to history at all, Greg?
They don't teach history. They certainly don't teach it in any reasonable way in the schools. I mean, I probably would have been a history teacher had I been, called to something else, because part of what I love to do, especially with young people, is say, listen, I know what you might have heard, but having been actually in history myself at this point, I can tell you what is and what isn't from having lived through it. I can give you the facts behind Vietnam. I can give you facts behind JFK's assassination. What a crazy thing, Mark. I'm watching the news maybe a year ago, and here's an ex-agent from our intelligence agency admitting on national news that they were responsible for the murder of JFK. And it just, like, nobody listened, nobody cared. I'm like, did you realize what they just admitted? But we're in that cognitive dissonance stage where we're in such shell shock. It's like COVID. Oh, okay, what's next? Oh, listen, look what just happened there. We don't have the mental ability. And this is my concern about all of the internet and social media, and now AI. I'm seeing a really big picture there with all of that we're not prepared for either. But at the very least, I believe that all of the media stuff, all the internet, everything else, it's atrophying our brains. So we are losing the ability to retain and to act on the knowledge that we've been given. And that's a real alarm for me.
I hear you loudly, because if you then explained and had a discussion about JFK, his death, and the ramifications for that, and then the ramifications for what happened in Vietnam, and the fact that I think there are 50,000 losses, American deaths there, and lives and injured. And it may actually be deaths if I'm thinking of the size of that monument in Washington. Then you're saying, well, look, then historical events would have changed. We may, as Eisenhower warned, the warned about the military industrial complex. We're not making any of this up, because you've said it. You talk about drones, and suddenly if you said to these young people jumping to the Ukraine, which is, yes, it's complex, but you can say, well, it certainly gives an opportunity to the military industrial complex from various countries to decide if their military machinery works.
Sure. And it's all part of a whole, I think, at some point. I mean, I love this country with all my heart, and I think sometimes of the picture I saw of the fall of France, of Paris, and I saw the picture of the one Frenchman that was just weeping, and I say, God, I don't want to be that person, because I feel that heartbreak of a possibility that we lose everything. That my parents certainly were in the military to defend, and their parents, and But we're at a point where we don't really understand how all of that is part of a whole thing. When the wrong people get in power, then you have decisions that are made not necessarily by our will, but by some other powers, what the former president and current president or new president we called the deep state, the swamp. And I'll tell you when I realized that we had missed something in how extensive it was. And I'm sure you've heard of and maybe done some shows on what's called the Bohemian Grove in Northern California. And I knew a great deal about it because of my research. I actually was trying to rescue somebody that was there going through all their ceremonies. This is dark, deep level stuff. And at some point during that process, I was driving down a main street in my hometown, and I heard that a president had just accepted the nomination for the presidency of the United States, and they were going to go live to the Bohemian Grove to hear his acceptance speech. I'm like, are you kidding me? So really, who is making these decisions? And so I use my vote because I think it's the most powerful thing we have besides prayer being number one. But I also realized at some point, there is this complex of things that is not going to let things get too far off of their own agenda.
And we remember when Alex Jones went in there, I think in the year 2000, and made that documentary. And of course, Bohemian Grove, and then within Europe, we have our own Bilderberg meeting that's gone on since 1954, and people don't believe us. So when you say about a president there, and I don't want to age you, but I'm just thinking, was that Ford, Nixon? Was that
George W?
George W. And of course, name has gone from me before. Who came in 1981? Who replaced Carter? 1979. Who replaced Carter? Who was the president who replaced Carter?
Reagan.
Yeah. Reagan had even been there as well. Now, of course, by even saying that, we're bursting a few bubbles here. But this is the reality. And as you would then say to me, 1975, we think about Project Mockingbird, all the rest, and that this is not comfortable, is it, to go through history, because we end up revising it because the truth is being spoken here. Greg, what do you say? I mean, you've said about prayer, absolutely. And I believe, I have to say this, as much as I'll make myself profoundly unpopular with people who don't agree. One of the reasons why I think you have been blessed a number of weeks ago in the election is because there are many, many people in America that pray for the peace and the prosperity of Jerusalem, that stand behind Israel, that have a biblical, in my opinion, correct biblical view. And what you said about Mike Huckabee being sent out there, I think, is an absolute masterstroke, because we know what the direction of various things are going to go. We know what the Bible says. But the number one thing that we cannot do is to divide that land and have a two-state solution.
That's right. We know they're going to, the eventualities of Scripture, but Jesus said that we are to continue. He told us everything is coming, but he told us that we have to continue to work while it is still daytime, and that we need to push the message of the gospel forward. And I think about this. I was thinking recently, we've had several movies that have come out just recently, and we could do a whole other story about who's producing the movies, but somehow some messages get through. And I thought that the Jesus Revolution movie was brilliant. I was there. I knew some of the people that were there, and it was such a wonderful movie. And I encourage anybody who hasn't seen it to see it, because it showed what happens when a nation prays, because there were people that had prayed for years. God, don't abandon your people. Raise up another generation. And I was part of that generation that got raised up in a miraculous way. I mean, the Holy Spirit just hit the West Coast, and hundreds of thousands of kids like me just got pulled into the kingdom of God. And so I think a lot of Christians saw that and said, well, we need to see that again, because if we don't, we're in trouble. So I think it really increased the prayer quotient. And then just 2 weeks ago, I saw a movie, Bonhoeffer. And I think it's a must see as well, because it comes to the point where you see what happens with a nation that's in decline spiritually, that's given over to the occult, that's given over to debauchery, as Germany was at the time, and how when evil takes power, that becomes the point where every believer needs to decide who they are. And Bonhoeffer was one of the rare pastors that stood up against Hitler, even though Hitler used quotes from Martin Luther himself that were anti-Semitic.
Yes.
He said, I can't do nothing. I have to stand up. And it cost him his life. And I think that's what we need to be aware of. We may need to make those decisions.
What's interesting about Bonhoeffer, of course, and Eric Metaxas has written the book recently about him, is that Bonhoeffer did come to America, I believe, and then went back. Right? He went back into the fire, and put his life on the line, and stood up. And at this point, when we are, we're fighting tyranny. We are fighting tyranny. We're seeing tyranny. We are in this situation where we're becoming more tyrannical in the UK as every single hour goes by, as another subject for another show in many ways. But I think the other thing is historically, as we look at the First World War, but I'm particularly thinking of the Second World War, and I'm thinking of the brave American soldiers that were in the landing crafts in 1944 in Normandy. And before that, from 1943, the long-range bombing that would go into Germany, and brave men that came over from America. And I look back on that and I'm very, very, very grateful for that. My own grandfather was in a naval ship as a stoker, which is not an easy. That's quite a frightening place to be. But we think of that, and in many ways with Europe, I think on reflection, all these years later, being very, very ungrateful for the American sacrifice on that particular day, which was in the thousands of dead and injured. But we see that cost of standing up for what you believe is right. And I think, as we're discussing film, Saving Private Ryan, the first opening 20 minutes of that, I think, is some of the most powerful filming. And you see those landing crafts going in. We see what Tom Hanks is addressing to his soldiers, and that landing craft doors goes down and the Germans are strafing the soldiers in. I think it's on maybe it's on Omaha Beach, where you took so many deaths and casualties in one day. And we think of that and the portrayal of that, and these soldiers having to get out, and then they're drowning with their equipment and then trying to make it to the beach, etc. And I'm sort of describing something very graphically, but actually that is the spiritual battle that we are in, and there's going to be casualties, and we know that. We can list of certain people that all right, I'll say it, as people like dear Russ Disdar, for argument's sake, and his wife. I'm grateful for, I know you were working with Russ and personal friends, so grateful for the ministry that this is real. This is a real Ephesians 6. We're not fighting flesh and blood and principalities and powers. This is real. And I come back to that. I think I know that a lot of people were praying, and people were praying outside of America as well. But by putting that Bible truth forward, which is to pray for the peace and the prosperity of Jerusalem and having an understanding of that, I think that's what you have been blessed with at this time. But Greg, how do you then continue to impart to the church in America to not be complacent? How big is, I suppose it's a bit of a stupid question. The word remnant is small, and I suppose I'm even shocked how small it is. What are your thoughts?
I feel that is correct. I mean, I try to be positive about the things I do see that are happening, but there's not a lot of voices there, and we're in a very precarious situation with the internet because, for some reason, in the last 10 years, everybody in the world has become a theologian. And I find that a lot of the Christians are wasting their time using the platforms we've been given to have big knockdown, drag out fights about Calvinism or things like that. And I'm like, wake up, folks. We've got this little window of time. And so for myself, any platform that I do get, and I've been blessed to have been able to speak at Dr. Mike Spalding's conferences and Tom Dunn and some of those others. My podcast has been something that it's been my voice addressing some of these issues. And I'm aware, as you say, and as Mario Murillo, the evangelist, said, the Christian life is not like a war. The Christian life is a war. And I've been telling people for years, if you enter into spiritual battle against powers, principalities, spiritual wickednesses in high places, this can be a life and death thing. Does God protect us? Yes. But there are times when Paul went somewhere and said, Satan hindered us. Why? Because he wants the mouth of the gospel stopped. And so my determination has been to use whatever platform God gives me to wake up the church and shake up the church. My podcast actually got dismantled last month, and I had to just start from the ground up with hardly anything and start all over again. And I thought, well, I think somebody wants me to just stop. And by God's grace, I refuse, and I'm not going to, because we need to not just speak the truth, but we need to enlist believers that are willing to take this seriously and say, Lord, I'm signing up, whatever you want me to do. I mean, that was the thing in World War II. And one of my favorite movies, I don't know, you've probably seen it, is Darkest Night. It was about Churchill and the war. And it was so moving to me to see how he got dragged into things and finally, got to be in a place where he could do something. And then, even though it's fictionalized, at the last part where he's on a subway and he's asking a little girl, what do you think we should do with Hitler? Should we just lay down? And she's like, no, sir, we should stand up and fight with our last breath. And I was moved to tears because we have to have that kind of determination that God has given us what he's given us, and we don't surrender. We know we're not citizens of this world, but we have to hang on to what we've got and push the gospel forward. However way God gives us, we cannot surrender the fight.
Was that the film where Gary Oldman played the part of
yes,
Churchill? Yeah. No, very, very powerful in that particular moment. And the other thing is, Churchill talked about his black dog moments, depression moments. It was just throwing the reality of the spiritual battle, the cost of that, because I'm, you very kindly, here's the pile of your books here, and then there is another two here, and then there's another one just to the left. But the reason why there are two, this one, right? So a story of satanic abuse, cultural bondage, and redemption. This stuff is absolutely real, and you've talked about that in regard to Bonhoeffer and what he was going through, and the fact that the occult practices of the Nazis, and then as Russ Tisdale said on many occasions, where their technology is coming from the other side, coming from fallen angel technology. Greg, those kind of conversations, I mean, they go they go along within the group of people that we know and we
Yes.
mix with.
Yes.
But do you find that those subjects are cut out of so many churches? Do they view those as sort of fringe, as
Fringe.
you are mad? Go on.
Definitely fringe. I mean, I measure what I talk to people about in this regard, because some of the things that I've been aware of for a number of years, especially subjects of the Genesis 6 and the Nephilim and all of that, which has been very helpful to me in my work when I have to do exorcism type things. I finally understand what it is and who it is I'm dealing with. But you really can't even get now, unfortunately. You can't even get to the level one with Christians in talking to them about biblical prophecy. And if you can't get them there, it's just a no-go with these other subjects. And still, a lot of what's being taught in the church, I'm glad there's a lot of churches just teaching, expository preaching, because we need that. But a lot of the other ones, they're teaching, topical, how to make your home better, how to be a success in life. And they wouldn't even approach these other subjects. So when believers are confronted with a friend from work that suddenly manifests demonically, they don't know what to do with it. Or someone who is in the occult or is a psychic, they don't know how to talk to them. Somebody coming out of an alternative lifestyle, they don't know what the Bible says about it. And, just list the topic, and we're just almost willfully ignorant. And it's not going to come from 90% of the pulpits, because, well, probably because a lot of pastors, God bless them, it's the toughest job in the world, but there's a legitimate fear of losing a lot of people. You lose a lot of support, etc., when you start talking about unpopular subjects. But at some point, again, back to Bonhoeffer, at some point you got to say, well, and as I guess Martin Luther once said, here I stand, God help me, I can do no other. And you have that moment of clarity that you realize the agenda's got to change for believers. And if we care about Jesus' church, we better get back to teaching people hard truths, not just things they like to hear.
As much as this is uncomfortable, and you talked about that conversation that Corrie ten Boom, and we remind ourselves of Corrie ten Boom of the sacrifice she made, which in regard to hiding Jewish people, and then in Holland, and then the fact that she ends up in a concentration camp, and her sister is dead in front of her, I think on the first or the second day. And this conversation going back to what you were saying about the Chinese church, where she talked about that, and the promise that was made, no, we wouldn't have to go through the suffering. As much as I don't feel I'm uncomfortable saying this, but it's true. The last thing we want is to go through suffering. But that's already started in a variety of different ways. One is rejection for speaking the truth. It's not comfortable, but it begins. People may not think that that's persecution, but I believe it is.
Yeah.
But then we look at the Chinese church and how big it is. We look at what's happening in Iran at the moment, Greg. There are many people that are turning to Christ in Iran. That may be a shock to people, because I'm not seeing thousands of people coming to Christ within the UK, and I'm not sure what the situation is in America. And you have a long heritage of sending missionaries abroad, and these two dear missionary friends of yours who are going to Cuba. Greg, so over the next 4 years, what is your advice? You've touched on it, but let's just try and drill down here. What is your advice? Are you in a position where you end up talking to pastors? Pastors are so scared of losing their congregation, so they may regularly, with great respect, talk about the rapture, saying, well, it's all okay, you're going to be taken out of here. We'll touch on that and later in a minute. How do you approach this, Greg? Can you get pastors in the room to actually say this is the reality of what is going on or not?
I think mainly you get Nicodemuses where they come to you at night and we have these conversations. There's a church or two that I've spoken at. They're very much on board and like, yeah, tell my people what they need to hear. And I'm grateful for those. But in terms of preparation, I think the most important thing, and it's been kind of my life message throughout the whole time, but especially recently, is if the church does not invest in legitimate youth ministry, you can close your doors in 20 years. Your church will become a mosque, it'll become a disco bar, but you have to invest in youth. And that means you need to go in and raise them up as real disciples. You cannot raise up a generation that's going to fight this fight. When you bring them in, you have some games, you have some fun, nothing wrong with that. But if that's all you do is have some games, have some food, have some fun, sing some worship songs for about 20 minutes, and then give them a 5-minute Jesus snack, it's not going to work. Because, and I've had this battle with parents when I was a youth pastor. They're like, well, we don't want to expose kids to too much stuff. They can't handle it. I'm like, have you talked to your kids? Do you know that they're facing far worse than you can imagine in school every day? And if we don't give them the right thing, the minute they get to college, as you know, here's all these professors that are just salivating for weak Christian kids that they can just chew up, spit out, and laugh about it in front of everybody. And that's part of the battle that we face with the preparing people. So I try to urge Christians to really invest in youth ministry. I mean, really get a good youth pastor that's going to teach kids the truth, teach them how to stand, teach them how to walk, teach them how to fight, teach them how to pray, all the things that used to just be part of what we did. We've lost that thread. So that's probably the biggest message I have for the church. And the other one is just get serious about your relationship with Jesus, because at some time he's going to be all we have to hang on to.
I hear you very loudly. And the other, again, this is uncomfortable in certain quarters. How much of an impact, in your opinion, has the whole Harry Potter thing, films, books, and everything had on the youth within America?
Oh, I think it secularized our country. And I don't mean that as an over-exaggeration. I remember when it happened. I went through all the books and I thought, first of all, this is real. J.K. Rowling is not, making something up. She may have trans-channeled it, but all the stuff she had in there was legitimate, real black magic stuff. So I knew that for a fact. And then I watched it overnight become the obsession for a whole nation. And we went from, I think, a place where a nation, maybe this 87% identified as evangelical Christians. Now we're at something minuscule, something very small. And I think that really changed and took the heart of what this is about away from the church. And all of a sudden we were more interested in the fantasy character than we were in the truth. And that was, of course, followed by other similar things. So I think the effect was just very, very deep and wide. And this is a little off subject, but I think it should be said that, and I pray for J.K. Rowling that she'd come to know Jesus. But probably the big wake up thing for me on this was when she was seen out in public with a new tattoo on her wrist that says Salve and Coagula. And most Christians are like, well, what is that? Well, the Baphomet, which is the primary symbol of Satanism, and the goat, it's called the goat of Mendes, has this wicked-looking goat creature that's male and female, and it's got one hand up, one hand down, and on one wrist it says Salve, and the other is Coagula. What does that actually mean? It means to disintegrate something and to rebuild it into something else. And I thought we went from Harry Potter and all of that to actually seeing this Salve and Coagula where? In the new church, in the new what we call the emergent church is now the progressive church. And I've heard person after person that turned away from whatever their church faith or whatever and say, well, I'm deconstructing my faith and I'm rebuilding it. I'm like, you're a Luciferian then. You don't know it, but that's what you've done with the gospel that Jesus died on the cross for. So it's been a swiftly moving river that it's been hard to keep up with.
Is that the whole emerging church thing? Are they some of the issues that you then cover in this book?
Yes, and that was in 2004, and of course we've got many issues after that, but that was kind of foundational for me to understand, because I've been following where the church has been going right up to the time of mega churches being built. And then I had this powerful dream where I saw somebody who was like a carnival barker, and he had brought out this big banner that had a picture of the world and it had symbol for every world religion on it. And he said, this is the future church. And I woke up shaking because I don't have prophetic dreams hardly ever. But I told Lord, I said, I need to know what you're telling me. And then he downloaded all of these things that I didn't know anything about that were happening in the church that I was unaware of. And I had to address those in that book. And it was, and I think most of it still holds true. One of my pastor friends thinks I should maybe do a part 2, but I'm recovering from my last book, which is the 550-page monster that has taken 35 years to write.
Is that War of Ages or Treasure from the Master's Heart?
Neither one, although right. I love both of them. War of the Ages is about spiritual warfare. It's about the whole Ephesians 6. Treasures from the Master's Heart it's a devotional, but the other one is Diary of a Devil Hunter.
Here we go. Sorry.
Yeah, and that has that covers about 35 years worth of investigation into satanic crime, handled everything from SRA, ritual abuse, to the McMartin case, to the backlash, to false memory syndrome, to kids getting rescued from the occult, and dozens of real cases that we worked on rescuing people out of the occult. And so kind of recovering from that book.
When did you write that?
I've been writing it for 35 years, but I finally published it. I think I want to say in July of this year, I finally released it.
Yeah.
Because I knew it was going to create quite a stir.
It's interesting. I'm about to maybe make deliberately a very naive statement, because I think and you're aware of certain things that have gone on over here. One of the things that we do, I believe, as a culture over here, is that we have really built up a situation where we've covered up so much. In other words, if you turn around and you think, well, this is satanic ritual abuse, and you're aware of that, there is such an environment over here that if you spoke that, you'll be seen as, oh, we're denying that. That is not the case. I think we culturally, I could be wrong, I think we're further down that line than where you are. But maybe because I know you, had the privilege to meet Russ, know Tom Dunn, etc. So I know this is a reality. And it's a bit like trying to describe that culturally, you could have a big truck go down one of your freeways that says Jesus is Lord. That's not something that we regularly see over here, and we need to see it. It's more to me, and of course, it's more in the open over in the US. Sorry, this may sound a very naive way of trying to describe it. I just wonder what your thoughts are.
Well, we were fairly successful in helping kids and solving crimes done by people that worship the devil. There was a lot of media attention on this between about 86 and about 1990, and the big talk shows and everything. But then there was a backlash that started somewhere around 1990, I think, and it came from 3 places. It came from the intelligence agency, which one of their top spokesmen said, there's no such thing as, Satan ritual abuse. We've never seen any evidence of it. And then we had what was called the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. That was, a couple of parents who had been accused themselves of molesting their daughter. They used that whatever to start their own organization to say it's all false. So children make up lies. And then the other came from an aspect of a large Christian ministry in America that started to release articles to attack people that were dear friends of mine who had come out of the occult, and accused them of being liars and being, fabricating whatever. And it was so unexpected and so fast that it actually became the narrative now in the States, where if someone talks about Satanism, the immediate reaction was, well, yeah, that was all proven to be false memories. Well, no, sir, it was not proven to be false memories. It was a smokescreen that was so strong that we were not prepared for it. And it took, we had about 250 people were working on these cases. And now we're down to about 5. We're starting to grow again, but that's how powerful the narrative was. And that's why when I wrote this book over the years, it was geared towards addressing that and helping people see this is not a fantasy. I was there. I'm a living witness of children who died, of teenagers who committed suicide, of families that were destroyed, and who was involved, who, what, where, when, and why. And I'm not going to sit here and say, and let people say it didn't happen, because I was there. And as a result, I realized we had spent enough time doing all this and getting the book ready that I thought, okay, maybe we can now talk to people about it. And then last November, all of a sudden, several outlets in Canada and Great Britain and the United States are releasing these news stories that had just special reports where the people would come on and say, now let's revisit the 1980s again and talk about satanic panic so we can underline the fact that all that stuff is not real. And I thought, okay, what are they up to? Why now? Why after 20 years of silence? And I realized one of the top dogs in the satanic world, Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, had died. And I thought, this is the Luciferian changing of the guard. This is one head being severed and the other one taking its place.
Because I was about to say his name, and then, and is it Anton LaVey?
Yes.
As well?
Yeah, he died in 97. Aquino died this year, or last year in November. Not sure the circumstances. We're still vetting it out. There's some possibility it was suicide. We don't know for sure, but he was the most visible person. So I think whoever is in charge now decided, let's make sure this thing stays buried. So let's tell everybody it was all a hoax.
Which one of them was in the military?
That would be Aquino.
Right.
Yeah, we dealt with him early on, and did some of my friends. I was supposed to debate him at a law enforcement conference, and he bailed out and sent one of his people up to do it instead. But I was foolish enough to think he just didn't want to participate. And I realized he probably sent his associate down there to get a psychological profile on us, find out what he could. I mean, he was the co-designer of PSYOP for our American military. And so he was an expert on mind control and a number of other things. He was not a small player, and he got a lot of people recruited into the Temple of Set while he was in the military.
And people think we're making all this up, don't they?
Yep.
If they're finding it hard to accept what Bonhoeffer went through, but to think of what the evil that he was standing up against, and then suddenly when people are listening or watching Hitler's speeches and look at how this person is overcome by entities, etc., demonic, of anyone that then is the whole thing of the final solution, and then having that meeting and saying, this is how we would deal with the Jewish problem, and the evil in that, to say, right, now we're going to exterminate 6 million people. We're going to get rid of a people group within Europe. And we're facing now, I mean, we're in the last sort of couple of minutes, but we're even facing people that think it's acceptable to have revisionist history over that whole subject. Greg, as we come to an end, and you and I, we've got a book part 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, as far as I'm concerned, because I want to, know what you're doing. You've said a very powerful thing when you've had 250 people investigating and now down to 5 and building. In the last sort of 2 minutes, how can people reach out to you? How can people support what you're doing?
Well, I have a website, which is gregoryreid.com, and that's REID. It's one word, gregoryreid.com. I have a podcast, which is called Extreme Times, Truth in the Shadowlands. And we're still rebuilding that. And then if they want to email me, it's legendaryseeker@gmail.com. So those are our current contact points.
Greg, thank you. And I'm going to make sure I put all those links in there. And I'm going to play us out and say goodbye to you now. But please don't leave me. I'll officially say goodbye to you on the other side.
Thank you, friend.
But I just want to thank you for giving me the privilege and the honor and the sitting down of this conversation. And also at times in the conversations that isn't easy, but the spiritual battle is real, and the consequences of that are real, and we need to engage in it. Greg, thank you so much indeed. I'm going to play us out. Bless.